Oh, that's good, Keisha. Yeah, it's good to know. Good to know. Method helps. Yeah, it seems quite overwhelming when you're first faced with loads of detail like this. But if you kind of can separate things out, um, it just makes it more manageable. To be honest, I actually find um, this sort of aspect of painting still lifes the most challenging. Um, I find it a lot easier to do larger forms where I'm kind of gradually turning forms. But when I have to get in and kind of like pick apart loads of little bits of detail, um, I find that really hard. Some people actually find it really easy, so it sort of depends on your temperament. Some people tend to be more detail oriented sort of immediately. So I've got that little sort of umbrella one in. So I'm going to focus on a few of these brighter little shapes that sort of fill in the space between that umbrella one, we'll call it umbrella one, and this one that sits on the right hand edge, and then we'll drop down to the bottom. Don't worry too much if the leaves get maybe a little bit muddy at times as well. Um, that just tends to happen a bit as you're working, a session this long, and things are going to get a bit mixed in, or your brush is going to pick up lots of different kind of muddier pigments. The really sort of zingy colors we'll be able to pick back out um, next week in our final sort of detail session. I mean, if you're really careful, you can keep everything perfect, but it's not vital. It's not the way I work. I'm always just a bit more open to correcting things than worrying too much about it being perfect. I think that takes a lot of the stress out of painting as well, which is good. So I'm just about reaching this edge of the leaves. When I get there, I'm going to just take a break, checking with my tutored student, then I'll be dropping down to my leaves at the bottom, which is sort of the final major set to get in. And then I'll sort of see what time it is at that point. We'll probably want to spend a bit of time just adding a bit of detail in between these leaves that we've got in at this stage. And then a bit more time on the cast as well, for anyone who needs it. And I definitely want to get a bit more time on that one. But otherwise you can, but if you're happy with how your cast is looking at this stage, you can carry on working with your leaves or flowers. Different pieces as well have sort of different priorities or things that you have to focus on. A good general principle when approaching any painting is to sort of try to think about what's the furthest away from being finished, like what's the biggest difference from the reference or what you want the piece to be and how it is right now, and that can govern what you choose to work on at any given point. It's a good way to just kind of like decide what you want to focus on. But yeah, I'm going to take just a moment to check in with my tutored student. But you guys can carry on with your leaves, and I'll be back in a moment. So I'm back. What I'm going to work on now is, I'll go back to my picture. Pretty much the same thing, but I'm going to start working down the down this left-hand edge with these other little leaves. Particularly focusing on just these light shapes. I mean, these leaves are actually quite simple in that the left-hand, so there's two sets of leaves. There's these ones at the top, three of them that are kind of like a darkish green. And below that, there are these light shaped sort of greens, which you can see in my very roughly blocked in from last week. But we'll flesh them out slightly. And also I'm going to paint the background up to the branch. So the branch is a little bit thick. I'm going to leave it roughly that color, that sort of grayish color, because it's not a bad approximation. But I'm just going to alter its shape a little bit. So we're working on those leaves, then dropping down and just fleshing these ones out a little bit. And likewise, sort of working the background along here a bit just to make it more detailed than some of those greens. But they don't need to be super detailed. Then I can jump back up and just start to fill in some of these darker shapes in the midst of the other leaves. And that takes us through. We've got about an hour left. So I'm going to aim to get up to about maybe 2:45 or 5:50, have all that stuff done. And then for the last 40 minutes, I'll let you all work on whatever you feel like you're least happy with. And I'll do the same thing. Just focus on whatever you're not entirely happy with the look of at the moment. And that should give us a good foundation for next week. So as I say, I've got these slightly darker green leaves. I'm primarily thinking about how the background sort of interacts with this branch. Just using the background, painting the background in to kind of define the shape of the branch more. Because the shadow gets quite dark, these shadows behind these leaves get quite dark, I need to just use pure black just in there to make sure that makes sense. And again, a slightly lighter grey just to define this leaf. So these ones are actually probably going to be largely just cutting back into them by the looks of it. So doing that's pretty much defining them to a good sort of shape. So if you do something and it seems like you actually needed to do less than you were expecting, that's great. Just be happy that that's the case. Sometimes I think people sort of overdo things slightly because they feel like they have to work on an area, but if you just do a small amount and it works and it looks good, just leave it at that. And then that becomes a lot more of an efficient way of working. It means you can sort of save your energy for the really tricky bits. The more sort of efficient you make your painting style, the more you can start to focus on higher level things like brushwork and stuff that's really expressive or very personal to your style. So practicing these fundamentals and keeping the fundamental aspects sort of nice, simple, and effective makes it easier to focus on more complex things. So that's about enough for those leaves down that side at this stage, and the branch as well. So I can drop down to the leaves that kind of sit over the snout. And they're quite yellow, so that they've got sort of almost, I think maybe some sort of light shining through So again, I can use pretty much pure black around this lower area to start defining those shapes a bit more. Just because it's all pretty much in shadow, so don't have to worry too much about mixing a perfect background value up for that section. So roughly that level of detail is not too bad. What are we at? About 22. Too bad for down this section here. A few more smaller leaves. Yeah, it's not too bad for down there. So one last similar thing I'm just going to do higher up. Is the same thing with these branches, so whether it's sort of in shadow, define them, or sort of define their particular shape a bit more clearly. So just take a brief pause there. Just to take a look at how everything's come along. And generally it's not too bad in terms of the amount of information we've managed to block in. I would say probably where it's lacking most is through the sort of left-hand section where I roughly started. And a little bit in this right hand section, I actually started to get a bit more, sort of got into the swing of it a bit, I would say, once I got to this portion here and then dropped down to there, which is natural. You'll find you kind of sometimes you sort of get into a bit of a flow with the work, and it becomes a bit easier. You get used to the color mixtures and putting the right mixtures in the right place. So what I'm going to do for the last sort of 10-15 minutes on this section is just go back to those areas using the mixtures I've already got on my palette, just flesh them out slightly more. So it's just a case of adding more detail in between those leaves. So you can sort of do the same thing but at a smaller scale. So you find within those three bigger leaves, find the most significant next three leaves and put them in and work in that way. So it's always a case of progressively adding detail. So you're sort of chiseling away at detail rather than jumping straight into it. And it keeps everything a lot more manageable. And it means that, you could stop a painting at this stage and it would be okay. You don't always have to continue refining. It's sort of nice, there's some really nice bits of brushwork that I'm happy with in terms of simplicity that I could leave. I don't have to go in and render everything. Likewise, you could leave it like this and then just glaze over the top and so forth. But yeah, that's what I'm going to do for the next sort of 10-15 minutes, taking us almost up to the last half hour or so, and then I'll be going back to the skull and just sort of tweaking the skull slightly. But yeah, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. Anything that I was covering just now that you weren't sure about. Otherwise, hopefully it makes sense. So yeah, I'm going to move sort of here in an arc just around these kind of like little bits of leaves. They just feel slightly messier. There's less clarity than the rest of the piece. Even over here, this has a bit, just feels more like I know what's going on when I look at that bit. Whereas over here, it just feels a bit too messy to me. There are some branches I'm putting in now as well, just kind of crossing some of the leaves. I'm not really fleshing them out. I'll do that next week, but I am just starting to map them in a little bit more than they have been. That's more in preparation, really, than trying to get it all done today. So just about there with these leaves.